Thank you for the opportunity tonight to talk about the Washington State Crime in Washington report. And I want to do a little bit of stage setting for what this report is. This report is the actual numbers. It's the data. This report is not a reflection around feelings. It's just facts. What we often have when we talk about crime is we have both the fear of crime and then the actual analytics or the numbers. And they often get mixed together. So I don't feel safe becomes crime has gone up. I feel safe, crime has gone down. That's not what we're talking about today. That's community survey data. What we're talking about today is actual numbers or analytics. So I like to kind of set that stage because often when I do this presentation, people respond and say, I feel differently than the numbers. That could be 100% factual and correct, and I can't argue with the feeling. That's more of a community survey type data that's not collected in this. Next slide, please. So the first question I normally get asked is, why are you coming to us in August and talking about the 2022 crime data? So the reason why is this report is put together by the Washington State Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. They're contracted to do all the data collection from all police agencies in the state and produce a report based on nationally recognized ideology. So everybody reports their statistics exactly the same way so that you can look at statistics in Burien and Des Moines and Tukwila, and all of us are using the exact same metrics for how we submit data. Producing that report and making sure all of our data is accurate takes about 6 months, and they normally produce the report or distribute the report in July. That's why this presentation normally is in August, is because of the delay in the data getting collated and delivered to the public. We do use NIBR's nationally based model for how we do statistics. And it's important to note that prior to 2019, we used a different reporting system called the Universal Crime Reporting, or UCRs. And that's a system that's been around since about the 1930s, and it is not compatible with NIBR's. The reason I give this information is if you take crime stats from 2014 and put them next to crime stats from 2022, they're apples and oranges, because we're using a different system for how we put the stats together to make sure that we're using the national standardized model instead of the model from the 1930s that a lot of people used until 2019. Next slide, please. So we'll start big picture. State of Washington, approximately 7.8 million people in the state are served by just over 10,000 police officers. Crime statewide is up 8.5%, 21 to 22. Crimes against property are up 4.9%. Crimes against people are up 9.8%, with violent crime and murders both being up substantially. And crimes against society is up about 3%. The only way you can really look at crime stats is to normalize them to a population. Otherwise, they kind of say whatever you want them to say. So most crime stats are set to 1,000 persons. So we look at 1,000 people in a community and how many crimes occurred per 1,000 people. And the statewide is 67.5 crimes per 1,000. I want to make sure I reiterate, and I was crystal clear, these are the state crime stats, not the city of Burien crime stats, but this gives you a little picture of what's going on statewide with crime trends. Next slide, please. So the next slide looks specifically at Burien's crime. Burien actually saw a decrease in our crime during this period from 21 to 22 of about 8.5% in crime rate. Crimes with the most significant decreases are burglary, intimidation or threatening people, and theft. Crimes with notable increases were domestic violence, protection order violations, auto theft, and vandalism. Next slide, please. Calls for service were just under 20,000. So your police officers responded to approximately 20,000 calls for service when you called 911 and they went out. That has been pretty normal since 2019. We've been between 19 and 22,000 calls for service per year. For reference, in 2012, it was closer to 13,000. So while it's normalized over the last 4 years, it's gone up substantially between 2013 and 2019. Next slide, please. This is a table most of the council has seen before that I put together for a former city manager. It just kind of is a quick snapshot of what crime looks like relative to our neighbors. It is easy to compare your crime rate to a rural community in the middle of the state that is probably less relevant than comparing to our neighbor cities. So when we look at our neighboring cities, Burien falls in the middle as far as crime rate per thousand. We're not the highest, we're not the lowest. We clearly have crime in our community. Crime in South Sound is more noticeable than crime on the east side. And we clearly have crime, but we fall in the middle of the pack when you set it to the size of your population. I also want to point out, as you go across, officers per thousand, we are by far the lowest in South King County. You staff the least police officers in your community of anybody else in South King County when you look at how many officers you have per thousand residents are serving your community. And all the way to the right, you have the actual cost of your police department set to your residents. So you also have the lowest level of investment, which would go with the least number of police officers in your community. So I understand Burien Police Department is an expensive contract item. I'm fully aware of that, but I like to give you context that when you look at it compared to other communities, it actually is the lowest amount of investment in law enforcement per resident. Next slide, please. Some things that we've done in 2022 and into 2023 that I like to point out. We have spent a lot of time doing foot patrol in the downtown core. We have officers on overtime that walk the districts downtown and are highly visible. They also work in the parks during the summer, just walk in the parks, just being present in those communities. We have done a lot of work, and that's a typo, on disruption and interruption on narcotic and gun trafficking into our community. For example, our detectives last year served 65 search warrants. They collected 611,231 fentanyl pills, 415 pounds of methamphetamine, 24.3 pounds of powdered fentanyl, and 12 pounds of heroin. Those are search warrants your detectives wrote, and those were the results of the warrants last year. We started the Hot Block program, which I presented to the council a few sessions ago. We continue to collaborate with legal and code enforcement to work on properties that are chronic issues for our community. We have implemented the co-responder program. So having police officers, firefighters, and mental health professionals working together to handle calls and get the right response to people in crisis. And we continue to work with our regional partners on the Shots Fired project and several grant efforts surrounding how do we deal with violence in our community, particularly gun violence with our youth. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a different data set because this hasn't already been sent off to WASPIC and validated, but I just took a quick snapshot for the first half of the year so we can see if the trends or anomalies are fairly consistent. And what we see is so far in 2023, we're down about 10% on our crime rate off of 2022's numbers. So we do appear to see kind of a consistent trend downward in our crime rate over the last couple of years. I will put a caution. I did this presentation 2 years ago, and it did not have that piece of data. So this is a change in the trend, but overall, we still see crime very prevalent in our community. Next slide, please. And a couple things going on now and into the future. One of the things we've talked extensively about at council and in community is the Blake fix, or how to deal with making drugs either illegal or not illegal, and how we want to respond to drug use in our community. As of August 14th, there again was the ability to book people into jail or take law enforcement action for public use of drugs. We did an emphasis focusing on our parks and our transit center. There were 11 arrests made that day. Some were cited and released. Some were booked into jail. And also notable on there was every one of our officers carries naloxone to reverse somebody in overdose. And one of the people that they observed using drugs went into overdose and actually had a reversal while they were investigating the drug use. So there's also some life-saving component to that work. We continue to be short-staffed off of our approved numbers. King County is short a substantial number of officers. So I say recruiting, recruiting, recruiting. Every one of us wearing the uniform, everybody working the city, council members, community members, all of us are part of recruiting and encouraging people to join the profession, join the police department. So it's important that we're all working together to try to find good people to take on this job after people like me retire and move on. We'll continue with multidisciplinary approaches to crime, and really we focus on three main goals: building trust with our community, fighting crime in our community, and taking care of our people.